The D&D Monster Manual is full of many creatures to throw at the adventuring player party, but with close to 300 unique monsters in that book, you gotta wonder where they all come from. While some were definitely made for the game, most are based on existing creatures, either from the world or various mythologies. And in this poorly named series, we aim to discover the origin of each and every monster. Hello world, my name is Atticus, and welcome to Monster Manual Origins Part 1, Greece. The first creature we're looking at is the Centaur. These creatures have the body of a horse and also the body of a man, attached at the neck and waist respectively. They have a few origin stories, with some of the most notable being either the children of Ixion and Nephili during a plot to prove that Ixion was attracted to Hera, or from Zeus and the ground after spilling his seed in frustration after Aphrodite looted him. Kind of similar to Aphrodite's creation myth, but with fewer castrations. The creatures may have actually come from Greeks, specifically the Minoans, seeing people ride horses for the first time. Their main mythological story apparently involves a Centauromachy, or a war between them and the Lapiths, beings which may have been their cousins. But I majored in classical civilizations, mostly Rome, admittedly, but partially Greek, and I remember nothing of this. I'm not convinced the Centauromachy isn't Renaissance fan fiction. Okay, so it looks like the main source is Ovid's Metamorphoses in the 12th book, based off of a line by Nestor in the first book of the Iliad. So it's Roman fan fiction, which would have been my second guess. Back on track, there are still Greek myths which have centaurs in them, even if they're not necessarily the focus. The centaur Chiron served as mentor to many Greek heroes, and Hercules met his death as a result of Nessus, even though Nessus wasn't the one to ultimately kill him. Unlike Chiron, most centaurs are more like their horse side than the human one. So how about their D&D representation? From the 5th edition Monster Manual, the book we're using for this series, we see them described as reclusive wanderers and as nomadic, which does match with the mythos. They get a speed of 50 feet, which is right between the speed of a draft horse and a riding horse, and their abilities favor physical combat, reminiscent of Chiron's training of heroes, and, I guess, the Centauromachy. Next up is the Chimera. This story is a personal favorite of mine. The Chimera comes from the myth of Bellerophon. Our hero's story begins with exile after the murder of someone. Perhaps a brother, or perhaps a Belleros, making his name more a title than anything else. Regardless, he gets exiled to Argos, where he's pardoned for his crime. The queen takes a liking to him, but he turns down her advances, and she, the first episode of S.H.I.E.L.D. heroes him. Unwilling to risk the god's ire by killing a guest, the king of Argos sends him to Lycia with a letter for the king, which essentially reads, "Please kill the messenger." Before reading this letter, though, the king of Lycia parties with Bellerophon for 9 days, and is also unwilling to risk the wrath of the gods. But instead of passing the task on to yet another king, this one, named Iobates, sends Bellerophon off to slay the Chimera, a task which should have led to his demise. This Chimera is described as a beast with, in the forepart a lion, in the hinder a serpent, and in the midst a goat, breathing forth in terrible wise the might of blazing fire. While not explicit in the quote, typically all three heads are described as present at their respective parts of the body, the lion at the front, the goat sprouting out the back, and the serpent acting as a tail. The goat was the head that breathed fire, if you were curious. Most stories of its defeat mentions Bellerophon's winged help, allowing him to utilize the high ground and avoid the beast's attacks. But there is one story that says the beast is ultimately slain by melting lead in its throat. The 5e Chimera is a bit different. still having the hindquarters of a goat, the front legs of a lion, but instead of a serpent, it has dragon wings and a tail. It also has the heads of all three right up front, and the dragon head breathes fire, which makes more intuitive sense, but deviates from the source material in a way that I think detracts from the creature's majesty. It also now has wings, which would have eliminated Bellerophon's one advantage. The stat block matches pretty well, minus the fly speed of what I would expect, but I would have liked to see a tail whip and kick, allowing the creature to defend from all sides and not be flanked, like the original iteration. The multi-attack could still have 3 of the 5 attacks, you just pick and choose based on the position of the player party. But how did Bellerophon, a mere mortal, defeat the Chimera?
That's right, Hercules!
Did not have Pegasus, despite what Disney would have you believe. Bellerophon was the hero who tamed the winged horse. Despite his popularity, Pegasus doesn't have much in the way of stories. He helped Bellerophon after the latter tamed him with the help of a golden bridle gifted to him from the goddess Athena, and was integral in most of Bellerophon's monster slaying. After becoming famous enough, Bellerophon became incredibly prideful, which, as we all know, cometh before the fall. Atop his trusty steed, Bellerophon tried to fly to Mount Olympus, where the gods reside, but fell from Pegasus partway up and fell to his death. Pegasus made it, though, and Zeus, king of the gods, turned him into a constellation. 5e turns Pegasus from a single entity into an entire race of winged horses, which spend the majority of their time in the sky, touching down only to drink from springs, which is kind of true to the source material. As Pegasus had to be tamed while drinking from a well, we can surmise that when not drinking, Pegasus was airborne, and thus difficult to catch. The Pegasus stat block looks pretty reasonable, with great speed and intelligence. The Pegasus understands more languages than I do, and has pretty high perception. The only combat skill is a kick, which is fair, holding true to Pegasus' combat utility being as a steed rather than his own fighter. 5th edition Pegasi as a species give birth to each other, but the original Pegasus was born from Medusa, sprouting from her blood alongside his brother Chrysaor in the moment of her death. Medusa had been pregnant by Poseidon when Perseus slew her, and like other divine or semi-divine beings such as Athena and Dionysus, Pegasus and Chrysaor just kind of sprung out and into existence. The telling that I believe is a bit more well known has Medusa start her life as just a regular human person that Poseidon takes a liking to and sleeps with in a temple of Athena. Taking offense to this action, Athena takes her anger out on Medusa, transforming her into a creature with snakes for hair and whose gaze could turn people into stone. Medusa lives her life for a bit before the hero Perseus comes and kills her, using a mirror shield to avoid looking directly at her. This origin is more Roman fanfiction by Ovid, but before we get into the Greek telling, let's look at 5e. Once again, Medusa is not a single entity, but the name for a kind of entity, specifically one where a person asks for eternal youth, beauty, and/or adoration from the wrong being, and gets turned into a Medusa, as a kind of, this is technically what you asked for. Still better than the old lady in the jar ending, if you ask me. The main ability in a Medusa's stat block is the passive Petrifying Gaze, where anything that starts its turn within eyesight of a Medusa, and also 30 feet, must either avert their gaze or make a con save. If they fail, they start to turn to stone and can't move that turn. If they fail again, they become a statue. If they fail miserably the first time, they skip the middle step and go straight to stone. This is an interesting mechanic and true to the source material. I'm a fan. Back to the Greek origin of Medusa, they just said she was born like that, as a Gorgon, one of 3 to be exact, beings which had 3 notable traits: wings, snake hair, and a hatred for men. For whatever reason, 2 of the Gorgon sisters, Stheno and Uriel, were immortal, but Medusa was not. Thenno and Uriel don't have much in the way of myths, at least to my knowledge, but the image of a Gorgon was used to ward off evil. In 5e, the Gorgon is... Okay, so after looking into it a bit further, this creature is based not off the Gorgons, or the Greek one, but off of the Catoblepas, an Ethiopian creature that looks like a buffalo and is notable for always having its head pointed downwards. Its other notable trait is that its gaze was lethal. A few people also said it could breathe fire. On account of the killer stare, it's sometimes called a Gorgon because really that's all the similarity you need. 5e adds iron plates and has it breathe green fumes. This Gorgon is called a monstrous predator despite the Catoblepas usually being a passive herbivore. The stat block is about what you would expect from a bull that can turn people to stone with its eyes. The passive is Trampling Charge, allowing it to try and knock someone prone, potentially getting an extra attack in. No Petrifying Gaze, but the source material does specifically note that it has a heavy head and is always looking down, so it makes sense that it'd be an action rather than a passive. The attacks Gore and Hooves fits a rampaging boar, and our petrifying attack is Petrifying Breath? Breath? I'm sorry, the Gorgon petrifies with its breath? That fits the source material. Some sources say the Catoblepas petrifies with its breath. That's fine. But if it's not from the eyes, why is this called a Gorgon? That's the one thing. The single item connecting these two separate creatures, and you went with the name that makes no sense given your incarnation of the creature. Beach wizards, what are you doing? The next creature is the Cyclops, famous for its appearance in the Odyssey. There might actually be a few groups of Cyclops, but this version is definitely based off of Homer's, so that's the story we'll be looking into. Homer had the Cyclopes be a race of giant beings that lived in caves and were shepherds. We meet exactly one of these beings, Polyphemus. After Odysseus and friends land on an island and plunder a random cave full of provisions, Polyphemus comes home and eats two of them, additionally locking them in the cave for later. Odysseus gets the Cyclops drunk and says his name is Nobody. After Polyphemus falls asleep, they stab his eye, blinding him. In the morning, after the sheep are let out to graze, Odysseus and friends cling to the underside of the sheep so that Polyphemus doesn't notice their escape, and in a victorious moment of hubris, Odysseus reveals his name to the Cyclops, son of Poseidon, god of the sea, who ensures that the rest of Odysseus' way home is quite eventful. From what is available in Homer, we know that there are more Cyclopes, but since their name only means round eye, we don't actually know if all of them have one eye, like Polyphemus. Euripides later declares it so in one of his plays, but it's not actually stated in Homer. 5e follows Euripides and has all Cyclopes have one eye. D&D Cyclopes are also fairly reclusive, living simple shepherding lives. They are neither smart nor wise, but are possessed of tremendous strength and a great deal of health, using a d12 for their health die. They fight with a club or by hurling rocks, though this latter option is only effective within 30 feet, since they suffer disadvantage on attacks against creatures any further away. But they also have a speed of 30 feet. So the rock's more a last-ditch effort. Next on the list is the Death Dog from Appendix A, Miscellaneous Creatures. Appendix A mostly has creatures that are just like animals from the real world. As such, we get very little in the way of descriptions, but we do get some art for the Death Dog and a little blurb. They apparently have hate in their heart and a taste for human flesh. Their saliva also carries a disease which can cause a person's flesh to rot off the bone. Pleasant. I was originally going to list this entry with the animals but weird category. However, the moniker Death Dog brings to mind Cerberus, the three-headed dog guardian of the underworld. And the art of the Death Dog shows it with two heads, which matches Orthus, the brother of Cerberus, who had a less glamorous job guarding some guy's cattle. A fun fact, Gorgon, the guy who had the cattle, had 3 heads or 3 bodies, depending on who you ask. Orthus was slain by Hercules, and it is unclear if he had hatred in his heart. To my knowledge, he did not have diseased saliva. The relation between Orthus and death dogs may just be superficial, but the 6 degrees of Cerberus brings them close enough to justify here. For the stat block, it's basically a dog, but it can bite twice, because of the 2 heads. Also, each bite has a chance to spread a disease which can reduce a character's HP by 1d10 every 24 hours until the disease is cured. If your HP max hits 0, you die. Orthus had one other notable role in mythology, and that's being father to the Gynosphinx, or just Sphinx really. The Gyno prefix comes from D&D to differentiate it from a different Sphinx that we'll get to later. This Sphinx had the head of a human, a woman specifically in this case, the haunches of a lion, and the wings of a bird. This Sphinx was a malevolent force, similar to the Riddler from Batman. Probably. I actually know very little about Batman or anything else from either DC or Marvel. The Sphinx is said to have been sent to Thebes, where it asked people a riddle, and if they got it wrong, the Sphinx would eat them. Everyone got it wrong, at least until Oedipus arrived on the scene. The riddle in question is something akin to what has 1 voice but becomes 4-footed, 2-footed, and 3-footed. The answer being a person, who crawls as an infant, then walks on 2 feet, and then when old age strikes, uses a cane to help them walk. After being bested at this game of the Sphinx's own design, the Sphinx jumps to its death. The 5e Gynosphinx is mostly a lion with wings, but whose head resembles a humanoid woman. Looking at the art in the book though, this does just look like a winged lion. Sphinxes get weird time powers here, allowing them to force everyone to reroll initiative while in their lair, aging people up or down, or aging everything. We'll have to check back in with the Androsphinx to see how closely this resembles their source material, since it's not with the Greek Sphinx. The Gynosphinx is said to be a veritable library of knowledge and fans of riddles, so that matches up nicely. The stat block has a lot in the Sphinx's favor, such as true sight out to a whopping 120 feet, immunity to psychic damage, being charmed or frightened, and literally any divination spell it doesn't want to be affected by. It's also resistant to non-magical physical attacks and has a pretty good list of support spells. Its single attack isn't all that impressive, but it can use it twice on its turn and up to 3 times after everyone else's turns through its legendary actions. It's certainly not as dangerous as its counterpart, but the stat block is spooky enough to encourage most parties to attempt to answer the riddle rather than try force, especially if the Sphinx remains in its lair. The Nemean lion is the Sphinx's sibling and would probably make a good D&D monster, but we're after Hercules' second labor this time, the Hydra. The Hydra of Lerna specifically is a multi-headed serpent whose heads can usually regenerate depending on who you ask. The starting number of heads varies, but Alcaeus puts it at 9, though Simonides jumps that number up to 50. Most authors say that for every head lost, the Hydra grows 2 more, which would make it very difficult to slay if you're going for the beheading method. The Lernaean Hydra lived in a poisonous swamp and was quite the venomous creature. The solution to the regeneration was either to have a third party cauterize the neck stumps to prevent heads from growing back, or by using the Hydra's own venom to burn each head. Some iterations of the story give the Hydra 1 immortal head, which was only semi-vulnerable when it was the last head remaining, allowing Hercules to chop it off and shove it under a boulder to writhe for all eternity. In 5e, the Hydra is kind of a single entity, and kind of a species of regenerative lizard. The origin story here has the blood of a fallen god being sprinkled across the multiverse, where every drop of blood gave rise to a Hydra. So they could be 1 per dimension, or perhaps multiple drops could land in a single one, resulting in a couple of Hydras coexisting. They still live in water, a nod to the original's swamp home, but there's no mention of poison. Heads are lost if enough damage is taken in a turn, and regained twice over at the start of the Hydra's turn, unless it takes fire damage that round. It gets 1 bite attack for every head it has, and it starts with 5 heads, a far cry from 50. The Erinyes was another name for the Furies, and were beings that took vengeance upon Oathbreakers, and are typically described as whatever the author thought would be real spooky. They feature most prominently in the Oresteia as beings that hound Orestes after he kills his mother at Apollo's command because she killed Orestes' father Agamemnon, her former husband, after he killed their daughter Iphigenia, whom he killed for favorable winds on his way to the Trojan War. Since no one kept the chain going by killing Orestes, the Furies take it upon themselves to torment him on account of matricide being kind of a big deal. Apollo tells Orestes to go make the Erinyes Athena's problem, and she makes them protectors of justice. In 5e, the Erinyes are beautiful men and women with feathered wings who may or may not be fallen angels. Either way, they are now devils. Their stat block doesn't have much in the way of interesting actions. They are skilled warriors whose weapons are poisoned. They are resistant to a lot of things, including magic in general, and can parry as a reaction. They also get true sight out to 120 feet. They have a variant which gives them a rope of entanglement, and that's really all there is to say. There's a neat mirroring where in the source material they go from nightmare punishers to protectors of justice, whereas in D&D they start as guardians and turn into punishers. Next is the Harpy. They have a few different descriptions. Hesiod describes them as just winged maidens. Aeschylus decided they were ugly. Virgil stated they were bird-bodied and girl-faced, and Hyginus, Hyginus had his own ideas. He said a harpy was feathered, had a chicken's head, wings, human arms, great claws, then quote, breast, bellies, and female parts human. The harpy in The Last Unicorn is, I think, the closest to Hyginus' description, just missing the human arms. Their story has them acting as punishment for the king of Thrace, Phineus. He betrayed the gods, and Zeus stuck him on an island with a bunch of bird ladies who stole his food. Jason and the Argonauts helped Phineus out by chasing away the Harpies, and that's mostly it for Greek representation. They appear in the Aeneid and in Inferno, and today in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Their appearance is closer to Hesiod or Aeschylus. The monster manual doesn't really comment on their attractiveness, but their role as tormentors is pretty much the same. They just do it for fun in 5e rather than through divine will. They also seem to have some siren DNA with their luring song action. Lamia was yet another victim of Zeus's philandering and Hera's misplaced anger. After their affair, Hera killed Lamia's children, driving her to madness and to doing the same to others. According to one myth, Hera also took away her ability to sleep. So, to help with that, Zeus gave her the ability to remove her eyes. That? Sure. Her grief-induced mass murder caused her to appear monstrous and attain her half-serpent, half-person form. The 5e Lamia is half-woman, half-lion, and are characterized as hedonistic seductresses. This closer aligns with later Lamia folklore, which focused less on infanticide and more on seducing young men and eating them. Still not sure where the lion came from. The Lamia stat block reinforces this with an ability called Intoxicating Touch and access to spells like Suggestion, Charm Person, and Geas. Finally, we have the Minotaur, the love child between the Queen of Minos and a bull, as punishment for the King of Minos not sacrificing that bull to Poseidon. You know, Poseidon features a lot in these. What's up with that? The Minotaur, named Asterion, ate people, and so was locked in a labyrinth built just for him by Daedalus. Eventually, Theseus appeared to slay the Minotaur, venturing through the labyrinth with a spool of thread so as to not get lost. Typically, the Minotaur is depicted, understandably, as part bull and part human, usually the head, hooves, and tail of a bull with a torso and arms of a person. In 5e, the appearance is similar, but once again, instead of being a single entity, there is a whole race of Minotaurs. They still gravitate to labyrinths as homage to Asterion. The stat block is reminiscent of a barbarian with horns and the ability to perfectly remember any path it has traveled. And that's it. That's all the monsters in the monster manual inspired by Greek mythology to my knowledge. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much book to cover. So far, they seem pretty faithful to the source material, tweaking certain things or using certain aspects of the mythos to better fit the tabletop role-playing environment. Join us in the next Monster Manual Origins for some English folklore. I have been Atticus, and thank you for participating.